Anywho, we're gonna wrap up today with it's a sort of like a little bit of an extended Trek for commentary for Trek Tuesday because I watched more episodes this week than I usually plan to. I usually try to do 2 a week. I ended up doing 4. Part of that is because then our next episodes is famously the Menagerie parts 1 and 2. And one thing I'd note for this next series of episodes, it's I think these ones that I watched this week did an awful lot for expanding in on Spock's character and Vulcan culture. It's sort of like 3 in a row where you really get a little bit of that. But the Menagerie, famously the only 2-part episode, and it's repurposing the original pilot, The Cage. And I think it's a brilliant way to. It's not necessarily my favorite episode, but you imagine your producers, your Gene Roddenberry. You shot this pilot. It didn't. This pilot was passed on, but you still have it. It's still done. Do you let it go to waste? And props to them. They don't let it go to waste. They find a way to repurpose it and in flashback get that pilot at least on some level to air. And in Spock's department, what I kind of love about it is you're starting to see that it's, if up until now you're just assuming that Spock, he's Vulcan, he just doesn't have emotions at all, you're starting to see no, that's not necessarily true. It's down there. There's just an extreme version of stoicism that he's got that where it's sort of channeled. But I mean, essentially, this the Menagerie is he's my friend and commanding officer has suffered this horrible accident. He's now confined to a wheelchair and can't move. And we did way back when we were on this trip, and if I can just get him here, he can live out the rest of his life in even if it's just in his own mind, a somewhat normal way, which is a really, really endearing human quality that they give Spock. So I love that aspect, and it sort of, you have a little bit of drama of why is he trying to hijack the Enterprise, and you got the whole trial. It's just really, really quite well done. I will say it does, and I believe I mentioned this way back when I started doing the Trek Tuesday bits. Shatner is the anchor for the show, and part of why this isn't the Menagerie part 1 and 2, they're not my favorite episodes, is that Captain Pike is kind of a bore. He does not have the same charm. He doesn't have the swagger. There's just something there is an it factor that Shatner has that Jeffrey Hunter did not have. And so on that level, sort of going back through the old pilot, it's that element of it is a shade bit of a snooze for me personally, and I think that's why. And again, sort of an interesting thing, only 2-part of the series. Next one we got is Conscience of the King, which has a strange sort of balance to it of it's got this really interesting balance of being kind of really silly in concept, but also very, very serious. The silly concept is we're carting around actors in space, and which is like, okay, that's that's an odd one, but also it's asking a serious question. It's Kirk trying to find out, is he's got a lead on this actor, this actor, the leader of this troop might be this genocidal maniac that they all think is dead. And you've got a lot of themes about trauma in there, where it's just like you can't let it go because there's this particular guy, like he offed thousands when he was in charge of this colony. And then once you loop around and find out who he is, find out that he is in fact that guy, and you meet him, there is this element of Yeah, but it was a choice between half, or if I did nothing, like the entire colony would be gone. And so I did these horrible things, but in his mind, to save lives, and he's had to live with it ever since, and is being tortured by it ever since. And those are the types of big questions that Star Trek is great at asking. Um, and I another great sort of Spock element is knowing that Kirk is sort of doing at least half of this episode is sort of acting on his own and sort of changing things behind the scenes, and people are wondering why. And Spock actually takes the time to acknowledge that, like, I know him. This None of this makes sense, and I am gonna go bullet by bullet, and I'm gonna figure out why Kirk is doing what he's doing. And and he does, and when he gets to it, he comes to the same conclusions of, like, okay, I get what you're doing, but it's almost like you could have just told us this in the first place. So it's a good sort of friends stuff. And then again, you loop in, there are some great conversations in there between Spock, McCoy, and Kirk. And it's like, again, sort of like good core three character conversations in this episode. And I will say, whoever came up with the character name Anton Caridian, what that is a badass name. So hats off to that writer. And it's got the guy who plays Caridian is a great supporting performance, and there's just something wonderful about 60s performances from sort of older actors with good deep voices. And he gives this gravitas to this character who is trying to escape sort of past decisions that he's made, and it really brings a gravitas to it. But it takes a little bit on this episode to really get, the first half is, I'm not even gonna say half, the first third is like, where are we going with this episode? And then it gets to it, and then it starts to move, and it gets quite good. And it's got the writing that the start classic Trek writing that everybody loves. And the last one for this week, and this is a very famous episode, Balance of Terror, where we first meet the Romulans. And this is one where, like, there's a lot of people who will say that Star Trek was, quote unquote, always woke. And I look at this episode, and I understand the argument to a degree. I don't think they're correct on it. I think when a lot of people use the term woke, I think what they mean is just being a good person. But that's not, when people complain about woke, that's not what they're talking about. What they're really talking about is attempts to do inclusivity by excluding people, which Star Trek never really did. I mean, this episode absolutely 100% tackles the subject of bigotry. We find out that the Romulans and the Vulcans they're an offshoot of each other, and so obviously you've got your character, for lack of a terminology at the moment, your racist character, Styles, who looks at Spock with suspicion because of that. But what the show does do is that it doesn't come from nothing. It's not completely mindless. Its emotions ill calibrated is what Styles's character has. He had family who were killed in the previous Romulan war. And so, yeah, so there's obviously beef there, which he's projecting onto Spock. So he's not treated as some sort of non-person. It's like he's someone. There's these sort of negative aspects of his personality come from somewhere, and it does explore it. And the show, essentially, tries to correct him kindly, and rather than sort of bludgeon him over the head. And I think in 2026 with woke writing, they would have killed him off in some insulting manner rather than try to steer him into a better direction, which is where he ends at the end of the script. So it's, again, big topic. And what this also does really interesting and expanding on the Vulcan culture is when it's at the point when they're in their little meeting there where Styles suggests we have to attack, and Spock actually agrees with them, and he points out that yeah, if they're an offshoot of us, like our culture, we were able to sort of rein it in. Like when we were sort of really ruled by our emotions, it got really bad. We were able to rein it in. If they did not do that, we're in for big problems. And so you got to it's not fully made. They don't broaden it out much beyond that, but that's the initial kernel of what is the sort of the deeper cultural story behind these two races. So you got your seeds there. It's incredibly well done. And I would say my favorite element of this episode is Mark Leonard playing the Romulan commander, because it's this sort of cat and mouse chess game that Kirk and he are playing, and having not met each other, each of them forming this sort of mutual respect for their own for each other's intelligence. And with Mark Leonard, he's obviously part of they introduced the Romulans as this sort of very warlike race, and he is this commander who's been doing this for a long time. And he doesn't love it. Like he's like, it's like, why are like we're going out here making more? What's the point? I'm kind of tired of this. And he doesn't want to see more war. And it's this sort of it sort of trying to like understand, getting to a layer of understanding your enemies is the beautiful thing about this show. And it of course ends with the real, at this point, really famous line: I regret that we meet in this way. You and I are of a kind. In a different reality, I could have called you friend. And it's sort of a really beautiful commentary on the human condition, and that's absolutely what Star Trek did well. And that was the writing that made this show. It's so these are three, or four if we're counting the two-parter. Those are four solid episodes, and it's like we're halfway into season one, and it's just one banger after another. And it's all of it's television that should be watched to learn good writing and to learn good science fiction. And it's awfully silly. And one thing I am growing to really love is how obviously the sets, they're really kind of cheap, and like you can see the styrofoam and the cardboard. But one thing it does that's really well used, and I suppose kids today would say it's silly looking, but is color. You're like using like the pinks and like multicolored rainbow stuff over the walls to sort of flesh out the environment. This is what we got to deal with. This is what we have in terms of budget to utilize, and they did the best that they could with it, and it's extremely, extremely charming. And I much prefer, like at the Balance of Terror, the ship coming down. It's all they're very clearly lifting up a styrofoam wall, and it's just so charming. And I much prefer that as opposed to sinking of hundreds of millions of dollars into nonsense CG. Like, give me the styrofoam every damn time. So encouraging, again, go back and watch original Star Trek. And that's where we'll, I think, kind of wrap up for today. And I will see you next week.